Hello, my name is Matthew, and I finished reading The Return of the King by Tolkien, uh, which means I finished reading the whole of The Lord of the Rings, and I loved it. It was an amazing experience to go through this book, and it tricked me in a lot of ways. I went into this book how I imagine a lot of people approach this book, either from the movies or reading The Hobbit and liking some element of it. I really liked the Hobbits in the Shire, so I started reading The Lord of the Rings, and you start in the Shire, and it has a similar framework. It has that there and back again structure. We're in the Shire, there's going to be an adventure, and it feels like at first you're going to be reading maybe a longer, more expansive version of a Hobbit like story. And it's so much more than that. And it sneaks up on you. By the time you realize the scale of the story that you're reading, it takes you a moment to think about how have I gotten to this place? How are there so many, not just characters introduced, but whole worlds of people, the elves and dwarves and hobbits and wizards and dragons and magical eagles and talking trees and mystical magical beings. It just grows on you. Now, the thing that blew my mind about The Return of the King shocked me to the point I can't believe I've never heard it spoken about, is that The Return of the King, the ending of The Lord of the Rings, has a Scooby-Doo reveal. The ending of the book is a Scooby-Doo story. It's unreal. I'll get to that in a second, but I in a million years I wouldn't have thought the book would have ended the way it did. It certainly doesn't end the way it does in the movie. But the beginning of The Return of the King, we're at all-out warfare. It reminded me of a fantasy retelling of World War One, with the scope, the amount of different kinds of people and different geographies, the just the sheer size of the landscape of the different kinds of battles that are involved, the senselessness, the chaos, the violence. We now have all of these different characters that are sprawled out into all of these different storylines, and I just remember asking myself, like, how the book is so easy to read with all these mechanisms going. It's masterfully done in that sense that it doesn't turn into a complete confusing mess. But when I think about and try to articulate how did all of these characters get into all of these circumstances, and how did this whole war get so bad so fast, that it feels like there could have been so many different situations that could have turned out better. And the the characters that tethered me, that kept me emotionally invested in battle scenes where there's thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people being massacred and butchered, were the hobbits. And Frodo and Sam, of course, are sort of like the stars of the book. But Merry and Pippin are transformative characters. When they are introduced and that they're going on in the story early in the book, they felt interchangeable, um, insignificant, and there for comic relief. They're going to just be a little bit of levity, kind of goofing around. They're not taking things very seriously. And the way this book starts dividing itself up and getting grander in scope was by the division of the initial party, or the Fellowship of the Rings, where we had the four hobbits, Frodo Baggins, Samwise, Genji, and then Pippin and Meriadoc. And was it at the end of the first book of the Fellowship of the Ring where Frodo runs off and Sam, his loyal friend, goes after him, and so they go off in one way, and then we have Merry and Pippin kidnapped by these orcs, and so they're going off in another way, and then we have Legolas and Strider or Aragorn and Gimli the dwarf kind of stranded or left alone, figuring out which way to go from there. And so now the story is broken up into three, and we start having these divisions. Finally, Merry and Pippin split, and now we get the most human perspective, the most approachable perspective for all of this grand violence, just things that are happening that are too big to kind of reconcile with. And then we have these fantastical characters that just seem to move so effortlessly from one epic battle to another. And we have Merry and Pippin through all of this having very different experiences. One feeling valued and people realizing that he's being helpful and at a disadvantage because of his stature, but he's a useful part of the group or the plans, whatever the strategy is. We have another little hobbit who feels useless, like he's a piece of baggage. He wants to be a part. He wants to be useful, and he's being derided and abused. And to me, it felt like the hobbits were the characters that I could relate to. They're the ones having a perspective of war that most closely associates how I imagine I might possibly see those kinds of things if it was a personal experience. Of course, they rise to the occasion and all of those things, but just looking back and looking up at just fantastical, huge, outrageous battle scenes where the death toll is countless. Just a head count where fields of bodies would be strewn. The emotional connection was with these little hobbits. And The Return of the King spends maybe the first half of the book with Frodo and Samwise off stage, and they finally come back, and they're on this journey. They have the magical ring. Frodo is the ring bearer, and his mission is to throw the magical ring into the evil volcanic lava pit, and that means it does something really bad to Sauron, who's the evil, mystical being, and then we have Saruman, who's like the evil wizard, and he's after the ring as well for Sauron. So lots of magical, mystical stuff. But we have these two characters all alone. It's desolate and despairing. They only have each other. And they have Gollum, this creature that is always sort of in the shadows. They had that final confrontation with the spider. But Gollum's not dead. He's not there, but it still feels like they're not alone. So it's tense. And they make this journey, and now it's worse than it's ever been. It's never been an ideal trip for these two, but now is just as bad as it could be. It's just despairing. And there's a critical moment when you read this kind of book, and you know as a reader that it's all going to end with success or victory, that the characters that we've been following are going to be heroes. This book, this journey with these two little hobbits was much more emotionally satisfying than I had any expectation for. Throughout the book, they are rationing their food. There's a moment where Sam and Frodo realize that they are not coming back from this. They are walking towards their death. And they have to look at their food rations and make the decision that we're no longer keeping food for the journey back. And so they're walking towards their deaths, and they continue on. And that is a really powerful image or situation. Moved me. It was moving that these two are just confronting their own mortality and marching on. Now, the heroism of Frodo, I think, has been a little overblown. I think the hero of the story is Samwise Gamgee. Towards the very end of the book, he's literally carrying Frodo up the volcano. But Sam has been carrying Frodo through this whole book, figuratively instead of literally. But he just seems to have a higher stature. He has more valor. He has just like an unflappable loyalty for Mr. Frodo. He's always there in a way that Frodo is not. And at the end, the critical moment that we've been leading up to, Frodo doesn't go through with it. He doesn't throw the ring. He puts the ring on. He doesn't throw the ring in the volcanic pit. He puts the ring on, disappears, leaving Sam stranded, all by himself, going through this whole thing. And there's the ring has a power over Frodo and all of that. But what an end to this story. That Gollum creature does finally make a reappearance and tackles Frodo, and he gets his finger bitten, and the ring and Gollum fall into the pit. And the pit blows up, and Saruman kind of has a fit, and Sauron, and everything starts blowing up, and it looks like, well, that's the end. And then magical giant eagles come and save Frodo and Sam, and we start getting like the revelries, finding out that Aragorn is now king, and we have this kind of a long series of goodbyes and respectful nods, and like a homecoming of sorts for all of these characters who had been separated from one another, but all playing integral roles in the success of this grand war that they've all been in, and now they've all come back together. And Frodo just seems to very easily take all of the compliments of how well he had done and how the hardship was so great and all of those things. And I think a little bit more credit. Sam gets his credit, but to me, Sam was the real hero of this story. And now they're going back to the Shire. And I had seen the movies. They go back to the Shire. Everything is back to normal. The world makes sense. They are drinking beer, drinking their ale at the tavern. Sam gets married. Frodo still has that kind of evil wound that never fully healed, and so for some reason he has to go off with the elves. And that's the end of the movie. In the book, they finally get back to the Shire. Before they get back to the Shire, there's gates and fortresses and walls, and the four little hobbits who are now kind of world-weary, battle-worn, much braver and stronger little hobbits than they were when they left, are seeing their home changed in a way that they don't like, and they don't understand what's happened. There's signs up about no trespassing after dark. They're seeing old friends, people that they recognize, following orders from people who are not hobbits. And we find out that the Shire has now been overrun by ruffians. And the hobbits are explaining this, and the ruffians are going to have the hobbits, our four hobbits, arrested, and our four hobbits now, Sam and Frodo and Merry and Pippin, aren't going to be putting up with this. And as I'm reading it, I was thinking, like, this is sort of like a samurai story, or like a western. This is going to be like a western story of these outlaws that have come into town, and now we have our four central characters that have to boot them back out. And it plays out like that. We find grown, men-sized ruffians trying to bully our four little hobbits, and our four little hobbits not taking any gruff from ruffians on their home turf. And they have to boot one out, and then a gang of ruffians shows up, and the hobbits have to form a posse. The hobbits are now killing people. They're like have bows and arrows, and they're like bow and arrowing these ruffians to death. And all the while through this episode, we're hearing about the chief, and the chief is the main leader of the ruffians. And like any good villain, he's off stage until the final reveal. And then it comes to a head. The four hobbits meet the chief, and it's the evil wizard. It was Saruman. Might as well have pulled off a mask. And he goes like, you thought you were gonna come and ruin my plans, and this wasn't gonna affect you in any way, and like might as well have said, you know, if it wasn't for you meddling hobbits, I would have gotten away with it too. This is a Scooby-Doo ending. Utterly ridiculous. That I had never heard of it before. It was hugely enjoyable. I absolutely loved this like really surprising ending. Completely took me off guard. Really gave a great character development for how much these little hobbits have changed. I just could not have seen that coming in 1,000 years. And a couple other things happen, and then it's the end. And I loved it. I'm going to take a break from Tolkien at the moment, but now I'm interested. I'm interested in maybe reading the Silmarillion at some point. Maybe soon. And I think there's like a handful of short story collections. I would really love to read. Now I'm even more interested in these hobbits than I was before The Hobbit. I'd love to read more about what's going on in the Shire after the events of The Lord of the Rings. Utterly incredible. So, those are my thoughts. I've read the whole of The Lord of the Rings now, and it was fantastic. So, if you've read the books, let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about anything I had to say. So, thank you for watching. Leave a comment if you would like, and take care.